2020, and we renewed that agreement in January of last year, 2020, for a 5-year term running 2021 through 2025. Our service agreement is built around 7 core mandate areas that were outlined in the economic charter that the local governments put together at the inception of Scredo. To some extent, it could be read as a bit of a sort of boilerplate agenda of local economic development, but there are important things obviously in there. Programs to support workforce development and education. I'll talk about that in my updates today. Business retention and expansion, that is really so much about small business here on the Sunshine Coast, recognizing that 99% of our businesses here are small business, 89% of them micro businesses with less than 5 employees. We do attempt to lobby and do good government relations work on topics that are shared interests across our region. Attracting business investment, including entrepreneurs, is something that I'll address when we talk about the Provincial Nominee program. Development of new residence attraction isn't something that we've needed to focus on as much, as we've all sort of seen. There's been quite a boom over these last 18 months of folks fleeing the city and moving to the coast. We're fortunate to live on an absolutely gorgeous Sweden here, and that draws a lot of folks to us. But thinking about what are those changing demographics, how do we tap into many of those assets and skills that are coming to the coast? Information collection and dissemination is something that we focus a lot of time and effort on, and still recognize that there are a great many gaps and want to be filling those. And then working collaboratively, boy, we spend a heck of a lot of time trying to make sure that we are showing up as a good partner on any number of good projects in community. To address first small business, because it does feel like it is, not only are we on the heels of Small Business Week, but it is a driving piece of our work. Touch on a few of those elements. The Sunshine Coast Business Recovery Centre, that you can find at scbrc.ca, is something that we launched collaboratively as part of our Business and Economic Recovery Task Force that we put together in the sort of first weeks of the pandemic, if we think back 18, 19 months ago now. Launched that and led that collaboratively with Community Futures, but partners at the table included all 3 of our local chambers of commerce, the Downtown Business Association and Seashelt, Work BC, Sunshine Coast Credit Union, and Sunshine Coast Tourism. And so it really was a group of folks coming together. Best practice that we were reading through and things like the BC EDA emergency response guides was to set up these business recovery centers. And it made a lot of sense when one was thinking about a fire or a flood ripping through town, open up a brick and mortar joint where businesses could come and visit you and help access resources. In this case, it was very much about being online and virtual, and our attempts in those first few months were really to make sure that there was a single point where folks could come and access more information about the different government programs that existed to support their business. That has morphed and grown into, it's almost like a satellite version of Small Business BC, really making sure that we do have programs in place to assist entrepreneurs in any of the learning that they're looking to take on and how they might want to grow their business, but also creating places for them to come and share what they're experiencing firsthand. The way that looked last week, in Small Business Week, I see on the call there are a few of you who joined us for those small business walks. We were moving up and down the coast, handing out awards for our recent Sunshine Coast People's Choice Awards, handing those out to the businesses. And in many ways, it was just heartwarming to see the appreciation that they had for the recognition of all of their hard work. But also for us, it's a moment consistent with the Business Recovery Center to check in with them and say, how are things going? And so we collect a lot of good feedback in those moments and through this channel that is the Sunshine Coast Business Recovery Center. Another small business program that we have right now is the BC Marketplace Regional Profile. And so at Small Business BC, if you go to view their marketplace, it's something that highlights businesses across the province and gives them a platform to promote themselves into other markets. And right now we're one of the largest regions on there, actually. We have about 140 businesses who are promoting themselves there. And again, it's free marketing for them. It's a wonderful way for them to capture more attention through channels that extend beyond the Sunshine Coast. And with so many of our businesses going online over the last year and a bit, selling their products off market, which is a great way to find new revenue streams. The BC Marketplace Regional Profile page is a fantastic resource that we're providing. Shop local, we certainly went all in on Buy Local Week last year, and we're doing it again this year, November 29th through December 5th. This small business is Buy Local Week in BC. We've partnered with Local BC again and are putting together some more campaigns. We hosted a workshop last Thursday all about sort of local procurement, and we did another one on Friday with local government, but this one specifically for businesses to think about how they're purchasing and how they support local, how they're making greater impact in the community with their own business operations. So look for a whole big campaign that we're putting together to come out this year. We're also then submitting a joint application with our Chambers of Commerce, with the BIA, to the BC Chamber of Commerce administered support local program that is federal funding meant to assist in promoting Shop Local through the busy holiday season. Fourth one that is there, and I think is of growing interest for us, but also something that we heard about from a lot of businesses last week when we were doing those walks. and is being led or was pushed in our direction from good folks over in Seashell around mobile vending and economic access to shared public space. Thinking about all the ways that we see vendors showing up in our community. Sometimes that's food trucks, sometimes that's stands at a festival selling trinkets and tourist goods, sometimes it's a bag of popcorn at the local concert. But recognizing there are more and more ways that people are looking to access income generating opportunities, that these opportunities exist across a livelihoods spectrum, that sometimes it starts as just a side hustle on the weekend, that is a fulfillment of a passion. Sometimes it's much more meaningful and significant. It's what's needed just to be able to meet the growing cost of living here on the Sunshine Coast. And so we're going to be connecting with vendors throughout November and early December, hearing from them, what are their interests? What are they wanting to be able to achieve? What's the infrastructure that could support them in that regard? We're also connecting with each of the different planning departments to hear, okay, but what are the limitations on what we're able to do? And then how might we work within those or seek some good productive changes to enable more opportunities for vending? And so thinking about, what is it for covered spaces on the coast where we could be hosting markets year round? What do we need for channels online to promote all the opportunities? And so it's an exciting piece of work that we're looking forward to taking on over these next few months. We'd look to be back in front of government early in 2022 with some ideas about how we might pilot something fun and exciting for next summer. Investment attraction, we built out a new investsunshinecoast.ca website. And I would put it at sort of 90% done these days. A wonderful resource, certainly, that I direct a lot of folks to when they have queries about doing business on the Sunshine Coast. The interactive data visualizations are a lot of fun, dynamic maps where you can select what it is that you're seeking to find and find out where there are different, food assets, where there are developments taking place. Imagery and story is something that we really wanted to build into it so that it wasn't just a data nerds website. There are pieces there that showcase wonderful businesses on the Sunshine Coast and just gorgeous pictures, of course, because we're in such a gorgeous natural setting. The work that lays ahead there is to make sure that we update that information with new census data that will be coming out next year, but also to make sure that we are finding new ways to build out those maps. I would really like it if we could work more closely with each of the planning departments to understand the developments that are coming online and really get a sense of what that means on the Sunshine Coast, because there are different sort of strata of identifying key investment opportunities that exist at the provincial and federal level. But often those bars are set so high as to almost preclude anything being included on a Sunshine Coast map. And so how do we showcase the wonderful stuff that is happening here? Another big piece of the work that we did last year was an economy and employment lands white paper. And so this was meant to get towards an employment lands strategy. And so thinking about the commercial and industrial lands that we have here on the Sunshine Coast, how do we make sure that we are activating those spaces, that we are doing the best we can to create more jobs in those areas? What needs to be done to protect those areas? We see an absolute diminishing supply of industrial land across the region. As that disappears, it becomes much more sought after. How do we make sure that we are doing good work with what we have available? Part of building out that white paper was putting together a GIS-based tool that allows us to build in screens to understand. So an entrepreneur phoned me up yesterday looking to find some space out near Port Mellon. I said, send me back an email with answering these questions about what sort of site that you're looking for, what sort of access do you need, what sort of servicing do you need. We're able to then run that through this tool and generate a list of potential properties for them that we can then pass along, connect them with local realtors, or perhaps they have their own, and they can take on those next steps with us available to help in what ways we can, but knowing that we're not a municipal development corporation and don't own these lands. We're at a loss. So we're doing the best that we can do in those moments to provide them with up-to-date information about what lands exist. The next stage of that is also then seeking some of this funding from folks like ICE-T to do some site-specific investment prospectus and business attraction strategy. And so there were some key parcels that were identified in that employment lands, thinking of areas around Port Mellon that are now part of a UNESCO bioreserve. What does that mean? What sort of opportunities could we develop there? When we think about the airport, what are the opportunities for building out new energy companies that could focus and be a real center of excellence? If we look up Seashell Inlet, are there opportunities to tap into the blue economy and thinking about what does it mean to build out tourism in a beautiful inlet and making sure that we're aware of ecosystems and not doing things to damage those. And so being mindful of all the different types of capital that exist. In Upper Gibsons, are there opportunities for us to get in some unique cross-docking facilities or order fulfillment centers that would support so many small businesses on the Sunshine Coast? And so in investment attraction, it does feel like there's equal parts of now research and marketing that lie ahead in our work. Workforce development is something that is top of mind for many these days as they talk about the difficulty in finding staff on the Sunshine Coast. Sometimes they'll recognize that has as much to do with a lack of housing stock as anything else. But there has been real conversations over these last year and a half. When we talk about the great resignation or the great transition, do we have a labor market shortage, or do we have a living wage shortage? Do we have a childcare shortage? All very difficult and complex challenges. But much of it, again, exists around research. And so partnering with folks from Desolation Sound Consulting have secured some funding to engage in a regional labor market strategy that is going to be examining trends and issues, connecting with employers, again, pulling in much of that data that we're looking forward to being updated through the census and saying, so what is the current state of employment on the coast? But also then thinking about the ways that formal labor market attachment, thinking about having 20 hours a week of work and in part-time, full-time jobs in fixed locations is one piece of it, but leaves out a whole other sort of segment of our population that are underemployed, or that maybe are only in this moment in their life feeling that they have the ability to put in 4 or 6 hours of work a week. Are there other labor pools that we could be tapping into on the Sunshine Coast if we think creatively and inclusively about who and how we hire? Lots of news stories lately. The IT recycling company up in Penticton creating employment opportunities for people who are experiencing barriers to employment. Another one yesterday about Mission Possible in Vancouver doing the same thing, supporting a lot of city programs there. Again, tapping into existing residents who are available and wanting to work, but we just need to change the way in which we go about providing meaningful work opportunities for them. Micro-credentialing and upskilling is something that we hear about at the provincial level. It's a key part of BC's recovery strategy. It was a focus of a session yesterday at the Bahia State of the Island Economic Summit. We're working with CAPU, with Sunshine Coast Community Services Society, and Work BC. We're just submitting an application right now to build out a whole new set of micro-credentials that would be offered through CAPU to support leadership development in the social capital sector. Thinking about those micro-credentials, those opportunities to do the upskilling. So when you bring somebody into your company, or if they're here and they're a volunteer in your social capital organization, as the case may be, how do you provide them with those next levels of skill that will make them either eligible for new promotions in your company or just more fulfilled in the work that they are doing? And so micro-credentials and upskilling will be a key focus of our work over this next year. The Provincial Nominee program is one I want to chat about for a moment with you. This is something that had an entrepreneur immigration regional pilot. And so as I stepped into Scredo, I was inheriting much of this, and it was an interesting program because it's meant to be a partner to the base stream of entrepreneur immigration that is led by the province. And it was an attempt to provide opportunities for communities to have a greater say in not only sort of what sort of businesses they were looking for, but also some screening of those applicants. The Sunshine Coast, we were inundated with applications. There were monthly calls with all the different participating communities. And while you'd hear from some communities, boy, oh boy, a win for us would be if we could just get one person to move here and open a business. When you spoke to other communities, ourselves, others in the Sea to Sky corridor up in Powell River as well, it was just, man, oh man, we are getting spammed with inquiries. And often what that would look like is submissions that were saying, hi, Creston. Really interested in moving here and starting a business. Please tell me more. And you'd say, okay, well, let me direct you back to the page that tells you what we're needing. But that doesn't mean you didn't get some real fantastic applications out of it as well. And we have 2 new businesses here on the Sunshine Coast that result from this program. We have Idea Space down in Gibsons, where Daria and her family are offering after-school programs with everything from Lego building as a means to thinking about computer assembly, to drawing. They hosted a mushroom workshop last week as well. A fantastic contribution, and they sell bubble tea that my kids are absolutely in love with. And so that's been a nice addition to our weekly routine as well. We have then Gabenga Aremi down in Seashell, who's opened up Workday, an IT tech support company, and is just being run off his feet and is absolutely loving not only the support that he's getting from other businesses in the community, but other IT businesses specifically who are saying, my goodness, we're overrun. Thank you for being here. Let's send some business your way. And so he's loving being here with his family on the Sunshine Coast. That pilot program ran into obviously some hurdles when the whole world shut down and folks couldn't travel. And so when it went on pause for a little over 12 months, part of what they did was they engaged in a whole lot of sort of feedback and survey, program evaluation, and decided that they would extend the pilot while still calling it a pilot for another 3 years and provide opportunities then for each of us to re-enroll. And so that's a conversation that is sitting in a state of limbo right now, is I guess what I would like to point to your attention. So one of the things that has happened is they were moving forward in the re-enrollment process. From the provincial side of things, they also paused then the base category. And without getting too granular into the details of this, the idea had always been that in participating in the regional community pilot, you were picking very specific NAICS codes and saying, this is what we're looking to have here on the coast. And if that doesn't align with the business that you want to open, no worries, you can still go through this base program. And so the exciting part of the next phase of the pilot was they were offering greater specificity in those NAICS codes. We could get down to 6 digits, and that you'd be able to update those as you went along. And so part of building out that strategy was the ability to be very specific about what you were looking for, knowing that, again, people could access the base category. Well, they put the base category on hold 6 weeks prior to the enrollment process, which sort of changes the entire strategy. And so while they're waiting to figure out what to do with the base category, I'm sort of left waiting to say, okay, well then how do we want to approach this regional pilot? There's no fixed date for re-enrolling. We're ready to jump back in whenever it strikes our fancy. And so I've just let them know that as soon as they, at the provincial side, have firmer information around the future of the base category, we'll be prepared to move forward with our considerations of what to do in the regional pilot. That said, a big part of the conversation also needs to be, is it that we are looking for entrepreneurs to come here and open businesses right now? Or should it be that we have a greater focus on skilled immigration, thinking about individuals who want to work here, bringing their own qualifications and skills to support the businesses that we already have? There are rumblings from the federal level of creating something similar to this provincial regional pilot, something that would allow communities to be much more specific about the types of skills and labor they're looking for. And so I'm staying in touch with our local MP's office and eagerly awaiting those announcements. And so we'll look to be coming back to this group probably in the next sort of 3 or 4 months with more updates around this program, because I think it is something that is important, because it lends to itself to sort of thinking about the diversity of our business owners and our businesses in this community. This is a good tool for that, both from the entrepreneur and from the employment side of things. Research and publication. I want to talk about taking the pulse, a snapshot report that we put out last year that is meant to be an annual report. And so in its first instance, we partnered with the Regional Economic Operations Branch from FLINROD, as we affectionately, I think, refer to them not quite often. And there we're able to take advantage of a good sort of COVID friendliness between provincial and federal ministries, where they were doing good data sharing. We were able to pull down information about what does the coast's business climate look like with respect to the composition of our businesses. And so thinking about the industries that they land in, the number of employees that they carry, the revenue ranges in those dominant sectors. What we found out in there, again, 99% of our businesses here are small business, 89% of them are micro businesses, that we have a little more than 4,600 businesses registered on the Sunshine Coast. And so registered being different than having a business license here. And the reason that's important is because we learned that 50% of them, in fact, are located in the electoral areas outside of the municipalities. And so when we talk about them achieving business licensing, do we send them to municipalities, or should there be a function at the SCRD? Other things that we heard in that, if you were looking for sort of a back of the napkin fun stat, when we break them out across their revenue categories and just take a median measure of each, it adds up to being about a $3 billion economy here on the Sunshine Coast when we think about annual revenues, which is sort of a fun stat that I'm sure requires a whole lot more nitpicking, but one that we took away from it. The 2022 edition will be pulling down information from December 31, 2021. So we'd look to have the report out sort of March or April, and also very excited then to be able to have access to that census information. The next big piece, though, of research that we'll be undertaking is this piece that we're referring to as a hidden professionals study. So this builds on work that was done up in the North Okanagan, and it's really about trying to get a better understanding of this remote workforce that has always existed here on the Sunshine Coast, but certainly anecdotally has just grown massively over this last 18 months as folks have realized they don't need to be in offices the same way, as they've realized that they can take great advantage of the wonderful fiber connectivity that we have here on the Sunshine Coast. And so as much of it is about learning who these folks are, what industries they're engaged in, but also tapping into what skills is it they're bringing here to the coast with them, doing some of that asset mapping, that if we believe in asset-based community development, how do we reach them when they arrive? How do we find out the great skills that they have, figure out what interests them about being here on the coast, and then start coaxing them on to different committees, councils, board opportunities, or even just volunteer assignments in the community. And so the purpose of that study really will be to learn more about what is really a valuable economic base here on the Sunshine Coast, to make sure that we have the programs that are serving their needs so that we can keep them here and, again, leverage their great strengths. That work should be completed sort of May or June of 2022. Finally, then, regional collaboration. This is something that takes up an increasing amount of our time. And the top one there, the Housing Emergency Action Table, housing is the number one issue that we heard about from employers when we were doing our business walks last week. And that's not a big surprise. I think it almost sounds kind of silly to even mention it because it's such a given. But, when you're hearing about it constantly, it's something then that we recognize is a critical underpinning of our economic development work here. Scredo was always a member of the Sunshine Coast Workforce Housing Society that has recently folded into the Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society, and we sit on the board there now as well. This Housing Emergency Action Table is one that was convened by our leaders here on the Sunshine Coast. We get together monthly to provide roundtable updates of what have been happening in the working groups, not only of that table, but also out through the various organizations that are members and through local government. Very excited to hear that the OAP portion of the MRDT funding that will go towards having a housing program manager was sort of moved forward last week, and I think again being approved this week. Excited to bring somebody on board to bring some of that very important human capacity to this, because so far now it's been side of desk for a great number of folks. Having somebody focused on it is going to be massively helpful. Regional growth strategy, really excited to see this work underway. And I should say grateful for the opportunity to be involved in it. The ability to think about where this SWIA is moving as a region, attaching some of those values, some of those aspirational goals for our community is something that we will then be able to attach our work to. So excited to know that the baseline research is underway, trying to do our best to sort of offer up as much information as we can, but then the importance of this strategy for every sector of our community, I think it can't be understated. Sunshine Coast Tourism and Destination BC, while we have been, absolutely keen to just allow Annie and the good folks over there to run with it when they call on us to participate in committees, we certainly want to make sure that we are showing up. We've focused our efforts on being part of the sustainability conversations there recently. And so through the Sunshine Coast Destination Management Council, as well as this VCM table, really trying to have some of those harder conversations about what does it look like to do good tourism. And that's really important. There are very, I think, meaningful conversations taking place right now between the Shishak Nation and Sunshine Coast Tourism about what does it look like for us to show up appropriate on this land when we talk about sustained growth. Well, what is sustainable tourism? What does it mean when we're facing water shortages in the summer and bringing more bodies here? How do we encourage them to take on the same sort of reverence for the area and understanding of the importance of these ecosystem services that we're trying to talk about with our residents as well? The Vancouver Island and Coast Economic Development Association, VICEDA, the Sunshine Coast falls within that catchment, and so we participate actively there and sit on the executive committee. Yesterday and today, I'm also involved with the VIE State of the Island Economic Summit, and so we try to make sure that we understand not only how the Sunshine Coast is connected to the Lower Mainland, but also how are we connected to the island economy. And then finally, the BC Social Procurement Initiative. A huge thanks to the good folks from Seashalt who showed up for some training last Friday, as well as, Gibson's was involved. The conversation around social procurement is one that the SCRD has really led here on the coast. Valerie is an absolute rock star in this space, and so we are so fortunate to have her leadership. The ability to think about how all three, if not four of our governments, think about the ways that we can achieve community wealth through public spending is really important. What Scredo wants to be, aspires to be doing in that space is not only supporting our local governments and moving forward the policies that will enable good social procurement, but also serving as a good liaison to our business community, making sure that they understand how to become involved in this, because I really do believe that it is a significant lever, that it is something that can open up a great number of opportunities for many of our businesses when it comes to local procurement, the purchasing of goods, community benefit agreements, and even employment strategies. And so with that, I've been eating up a whole heck of a lot of clock, and you've heard a lot from me. You have my email address and my phone on this last screen. I'll leave it up just for half a second and then take it down. But I would at this point welcome any questions that folks have.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
Thank you. I think probably I don't really have any questions. Just a couple of comments for Colin. Just really excited about a lot of the work that's happening and going and moving forward. Actually, about all of the work, but especially the social procurement. I just wanted to tag on to that because I am such a fan of that, and I know it's sometimes you have to look beyond the best. What might be on the bottom line, you have to look at the bigger picture, and I am such a fan of social procurement, and I'm so glad to see all of the governments moving towards that, but also see the business community moving towards that too, because it is that it is that that laddering effect of how it's the ripple going out on how it affects all of the community, on all of the business decisions that you make, and the government decisions. So I'm just such a huge fan of that. So I'm glad that that's the exclamation point that you ended your presentation on, because I'm just so thrilled about that and really thrilled about the work that Scredo is doing, and excited to hear more coming into the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Ties.
Yeah, thanks, Colin, for that. And I want to touch back on the industrial properties or industrial lands, and I can see that, especially in Gibson's, it seems there's a fair amount of rezoning going on, where it's going from light industrial to mixed commercial, residential, that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering to what extent we as the electoral areas should start thinking about providing some industrial land. And I know that Area D has, I can't even think of any really, and I don't know if there's any in Area B. There's a bit in Area E, there's a fair amount in Area F, but I think while it might be difficult to convince the population to amend their OCP, I think there should be maybe some kind of a push into providing more industrial lands in the larger acreages when the towns are clearly filling up with more dense residential developments. And I'm wondering to what extent maybe Scredo can have a piece in that.
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic point that you're raising. And what I would put to it is that our sense is that we're in a seller's market with this as well. And so we hear constantly inquiries from folks who can't find space in the lower mainland and are wondering what they can set up shop with over here. And in those moments, what we're wanting to make sure that we have is a very clear picture of what our priorities are. What do we want to be doing as we're opening up more land? Because we don't just need to open it for whatever the heck they feel like doing. We want to make sure that it is aligned with our industrial objectives, our employment objectives. I think there's a really important conversation to be had around the circular economy and in ways that we can talk about different styles of industrial land use. And so it's absolutely keen to play a part in that conversation. And the next phase of that research is connected to picking some of those key parcels across those different electoral areas and imagining what could be done differently.
Thank you. Will you be bringing that up as part of the regional growth strategy conversation as well then?
Yeah, absolutely. And so have shared that report, widely with the planners. I'm sitting on the steering committee for the regional growth strategy baseline research stage. It's got a longer name than I'm remembering in this moment, but we'll make sure that it's available and want to be aligning our efforts. And so part of right now where we're sort of sitting is going, okay, so how does that get going? How do we make sure that we are being additive in that conversation as opposed to duplicating anything that's required?
Thank you. Director Beamish.
Yeah, Colin, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It is great work you guys are doing. And I really appreciated, as did the businesses, the Business Awards opportunity last week. It was really gratifying to go around and talk to some of the businesses and see how much they appreciated the recognition. And it was a good opportunity also to talk to them. And again, you're right, the issues of the ability to hire people, the ability to those people to be hired to find homes in Gibson's, the area, is a real challenge. So thank you for that. And all the others, and I'll be pleased to talk about the industrial lands as well at some point in time, but we'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Action-packed presentation, Colin. Lots of stuff going on. So a couple things caught my attention was the local GDP, $3 billion is kind of the an estimate, kind of first crack at this. Is that the number that I heard?
Yeah, and again, I was trying to make sure that I was being fully candid around the sort of assumptions that go into that. But basically what we got back from CRA was all the different numbers of businesses by revenue categories. When we did some back of the napkin math, added up, it came to $3.2 billion a year of revenue.
So it's the best number we have right now in terms of local GDP. Okay, may I ask another, Chair? It was the snapshot, the 2021 snapshot. I'm just wondering where that lives and where I would find that document?
Yeah, so I will email it to you, is the worst but useful first answer. We're trying to figure out, we've had to rebuild a Scredo website as well, and so trying to think about how we create good ways of storing these different pieces of information. And so I can forward it to you, and I send it to anybody. If they have questions, most of what I'm doing these days, directing folks to me and giving them as much as I can, but know that we need to do better than that.
Thanks.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Right. So one of our strategic goals has been more collaboration between the local governments here. And we're starting to see, I think, some results, like with sharing a building inspector between Town of Gibson's and SCRD. So I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how you're working with the local governments and what opportunities you see to sort of rationalize some of our systems across the jurisdictions so that it's more comprehensible to the public.
Yeah, boy, I mean, there's a fun and challenging question, and without geeking out too much about it, where my brain breaks down most of the time trying to do that is just around the two different structures of government that we have. It's really difficult to think about how you align municipalities and regional districts. When we talk something like business licensing, not having business licenses in the regional district is an intriguing challenge when you talk about how might we license short-term rentals. Say, well, you don't have a licensing function, it makes it harder to cut down and crack down on anything that is, running counter to the policies that you want to see. But also when you start thinking about social service functions, difficult when you don't have a regional district that is set up to develop that well. And so most of the ways that I then try to connect is just to make sure that I am staying in touch with our CAOs. CAO McKinley has been a fantastic resource for me when I have questions about the SCRD, and similarly is the case with Andrew Yeats over in Seashelt, connect now with Mark Brown right now in the Town of Gibson's. Ways that I can encourage each of you to move forward, I think that it's when we see policies like something like a vending policy coming forward, how do I make sure that when I'm conducting that research, when Scredo is conducting that research, that we are being mindful of how that might manifest in each of those local governments. Trying to think about that we're putting forward pilot projects. It's one thing to talk to Seashelt about what we would do in a plaza behind Town Hall, or to talk to the Town of Gibson's about what we might do in front of the Holland lands to test what could work in future years. Where are those places in the SCRD that we could set up mobile vending opportunity? And is that something that we can even work through with the SCRD, or do we need to make sure that we're bringing provincial government into the conversation early so that we can make sure that for these entrepreneurs for whom it makes two licks of difference about whose space it is, they just want to be able to access new customers, sell their goods, share the pride that they have in their products and their services. For us, I think it's really about being mindful ahead of time. But as I learned over the course of 4 weeks, thanks to you, Director McMahon, regional districts are an intriguing beast. And so there's lots of things to consider in that regard. And that's fun for me as somebody who can enjoy geeking out on political science. I think for most folks, it's just a giant area of question. And so we do our best to try to share the fact that that municipalities are different than regional districts, and be champions of the challenging circumstances that you face when we're in conversation with businesses. That we'll just do our best to try to make sure that we are being mindful of it as we come to you with recommendations. I hope that kind of gets to your question.
I want to go back to local procurement, please.
Yeah.
I know that at the government level, we're doing work to bring that into our tendering, et cetera. And actually, our staff pointed out to me when I popped into that session that we've actually done some procurement incorporating it, which I wasn't even aware of. But the other side of that is our local vendors. One of the regional districts or municipalities that I was talking to recently, they said they had $10 million that was devoted to social procurement. But on the other side, they had 40 million in goods and services they were purchasing. And they were seeing those as separate in their budgeting because the local vendors did not know how to take part inside of that social procurement piece on the everyday, buys that we do as governments. And a lot of our money goes out that way. So you did mention that you're doing some work with the local vendors, et cetera. Is more of that coming? More maybe a list, so that if we're going out and buying, I don't know, paper, do we know who has actually been vetted and knows how to respond to those kinds of things under a social procurement lens?
Yeah, absolutely. And so where Scredo has been involved in this British Columbia Social Procurement Initiative has really been focused on the vendor outreach working group. In part because it allows us to show up and add a voice of business to a conversation that at that table is largely dominated by government. And so when you hear from them about how they're going to connect with business and say, well, have you checked in with any of the businesses about that? And you hear, no, and yeah, okay, well, let's see if we can be helpful with that. But certainly in treating social procurement as a gateway to procurement writ large. When we talk to businesses, many of them aren't even aware of things like BC Bid or how they would go about applying for any of these opportunities. And so we want to make sure that they understand that procurement is a thing and how they might access it, but social procurement is an opportunity for them to be setting themselves apart from the pack. And so things like creating a social value supplier list or directory is absolutely good practice and something that we're working on templates right now with BCSPI. The opportunity then to be providing capacity to those businesses to first go through the training for how do we put together these applications? How do we tell the story of the community value that we are creating? Working through our local chambers of commerce to make sure that we're doing more of those workshops. There's also opportunities, and when we heard about it from Mr. Kern from District of Seashell, who snuck that social procurement piece in. I mean, how cool was that to discover, right? But he was mentioning the idea that you can do these reverse trade shows. And so sometimes it's about thinking about where in the process you go to your business community. And so in instances like we're seeing now, where there's a lot of government grant money coming through for infrastructure development, what's that first moment where we could start hosting trade shows, reverse trade shows, and saying, here are 10 grants that we've put in across the region. Here's what the work will likely look like as it unfolds. Is there stuff in there that you could be submitting an application to take on or responding to an RFP? Would it help if we chunked it up into smaller pieces because, say, you can take care of the landscaping or the land clearing on that project, but you're not a road builder? Getting involved in that process early, thinking about all the opportunities that exist along the lifespan of these projects is really important. And so, again, Scredo just wants to be that conduit, but we do see social procurement as the gateway to procurement writ large.
So you'll be following up with our staff around doing some of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, already have, and emails were exchanged too from the BCSPI group. And so part of Gibson's, Seashell, and the SCRD being members of the BCSPI is that there's access to free training and resources. And it is a wonderful team of project leaders there. The folks from Scale Collaborative are leaders in this space. Buy Social Canada is doing this across the country and tapped into every level of government procurement. There is expertise available at that table to literally walk folks through it. And a big focus of that initiative has been to create plug and play templates that, R&D is rip off and duplicate. We don't need to be starting any of this stuff from scratch. Let's just keep it moving forward quickly.
I think Director Beamish.
Just one last question, Colin. We're seeing a lot or hearing a lot about supply chain issues. How is that affecting the Sunshine Coast, or is it?
Yeah, it was sort of industry specific. Well, a lot of what we heard from the small businesses when we were moving around last week is that they haven't started to experience too much of it yet. Though if you go to something like a bike shop, they'll tell you, when we get the bikes, they sell out in a moment. There are only so many of them, but not as much of it that was related to sort of this like global slowdown and lack of availability to containers yet. That being said, what we were hearing from folks, businesses, they've just already started to build in those operational accommodations, right? They're ordering more. And so in fact, what we started to hear for them is that, the follow-up question, if you were listening, is, right, so where do you store all of that inventory? Well, I don't have a guest room anymore and I can't park my car in the garage. And you go, okay, well, is there something like what's available over in Parksville right now where they've built up this order fulfillment center? Is there an opportunity to take some of our industrial land, build out a different style of warehousing with cross-docking, create employment opportunities around order fulfillment, space for storage of inventory for different businesses, group and bulk buying, shared procurement? So it's thinking about all the different ways that we can respond to some of the challenges that center in that supply chain piece. But mostly my takeaway from speaking with businesses last week is that entrepreneurs do what entrepreneurs do. They get real creative, real quick, they're fast, they're nimble, and they're finding ways to overcome the challenges that they are experiencing.
One of the businesses we gave an award to last week did specifically identify that as an issue in terms of equipment that requires chips and things of that nature, that they are having a kind of a 6-month wait list for both the receipt of goods and servicing of goods. So in that particular, so it might be industry specific then.
Absolutely. And, one of those ones where in those moments, what we try to do is find places where it's either being discussed through larger chambers or trade associations and connect the business owners to that, recognizing that Scredo's agency in it is limited, and so we try to just be a really good connector in those moments.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yes, I was just going to comment that at our Transportation Committee meeting last week, we discovered that there is a North America-wide shortage of road paint, line paint. So, and that's why we're not getting new lines on our roads, is because there was a hurricane in Texas, took down the factory that makes the line paint for all the roads in North America. And so, yeah, now we have black roads. You never know.
Thank you. Colin, I'd like to invite you back more frequently because we're all interested in what you're doing and how you're doing it, and it really does tie into our work as well. And getting the information out into the public in this way, gets more buy-in, more impact. So we'd love to have you back. We could go
Always
on
happy
for
to be
hours.
here.
But we have another agenda to go through.
That's right. Well, thank you all very much for your time. I appreciate it. Again, any questions, concerns, never hesitate to reach out, exec@scredo.ca.
Thank you, Colin.
Wonderful day.
All right, so I'm going to look to the board. Would you like to take a break, just a quick break now, coffee, washroom, all that kind of stuff, and then come back and power through? All right, we're at 10:16. Let's make it 25? No later than 10:25. Thank you. Welcome back to the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, October 28th. We are going to move on to Annex B. And Mr. Ring, did you want to introduce us to this?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Thank you, we can.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the Q3 variance report is based on year-to-date actual and budget figures to September 30th. So what that means is we're, if we have an annual budget of $100,000, we'd be accounting for $75,000 of that budget at this point. At this time, we are reporting an overall surplus of $3.94 million on a consolidated basis. That compares to a surplus of $2.72 million that was reported for Q3 in 2020. So we're showing quite a significant increase in the overall surplus position. There are some timing differences that impact that, specifically with related to debt payments and grants, etc. So where the payments or revenue coming in doesn't necessarily align with the expenditure. So there are some timing differences impacting those figures, which will smooth themselves out by year end. The bulk of the surplus is being generated in two specific areas. One is salaries and wages, which is showing a surplus of $1.52 million at this time. And that's mainly related to timing of new hires for new positions. So if a new position was approved, we expect it to say hire on, say, July 1st, and that position maybe isn't able to be filled until later in the year. That would generate a favorable variance there. The other area, which is common from year to year, is vacancies when people leave and there's a temporary vacancy in position. So those are the main contributing factors to that particular line item. The other significant favorable variance we're seeing is in operating expenses, which we're showing at $1.36 million at this time. And we've detailed some specific line items where variance is over $30,000 that are contributing to that number, and those are detailed on page 8 and 9 of the agenda. Also, as part of our review, we took a close look at services that rely on user fee revenue for a significant portion of their overall revenue, as these services are decreases in revenue or not fulfilling the budgeted user fee revenue can lead to a deficit in these areas. So those particular services are transit, solid waste, building inspection, community recreation, and community parks. At this time, transit and building inspection are doing well and showing favorable variances in user fee revenue. Solid waste, namely the landfills, is effectively right on budget. However, we are anticipating that will move to an unfavorable position at year end, given that the bulk of, or not the bulk of, but user fee revenue, tipping fee revenue for the landfills is always highest in the second and third quarters of the year and lower in the first and fourth quarters. So we are projecting that will point. Community recreation is also showing an unfavorable variance in user fee revenue at this time. We are anticipating that will move closer to a budget or favorable position by year end with the increased service, both arenas operating and the reopening of the seashell pool. So we're hopeful that will smooth itself out. Again, that service overall is doing well, so not a concern on a bottom line basis. Community parks, the last one, that one is being impacted by reduced hall rental revenue and the Catherine Lake Campground. Those are the two main sources of user fee revenue for that service, and they've obviously been impacted by pandemic restrictions and whatnot through the first part of the year. So we're showing an unfavorable variance there. We don't anticipate that will recover, and that service overall is showing a deficit. So we're going to be looking closely at that to see if there's any mitigation strategies we can put in place. Overall, on a service-by-service basis, we are reporting 6 services currently in a deficit position at Q3 that are not related to timing differences. Those specifically are 4 of them are minor, less than $10,000, but 2 being community parks at approximately $33,000, and building maintenance at $27,000 are the largest deficits we're reporting at this time. There are on the surplus, we're not showing surpluses for individual services. However, there are a few services that have substantial surpluses at this point, and those include community recreation, Pender Harbor Pool, the water services, fire services, transit, regional solid waste, general government, and financial services. They're all showing surpluses of greater than $100,000. With that, I will turn it back over to the committee and take any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Before we go to questions, I'd look for a motion to receive all the reports. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And then directors, any questions on this report? Director McMahon?
Right, I believe this was in the report, but just for clarification to our viewing audience, we'll get another variance report at the end of the year, and then presumably the board decides what to do with these variances. Like some of them could go into reserves, some of them could go to offset taxation, et cetera. Is that correct?
That's correct. At round 2 budget, we produce a final year-end surplus deficit position report. Any surpluses will automatically be transferred into operating reserves per the financial sustainability policy. And then any deficits, we would include recommendations for how to address those deficits, be it funding from operating reserves or taxation in the following year. So that report comes forward at round 2, and yeah.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Yeah, I got a question about General Government 110. We're showing a transfer to a surplus of approximately $1.2 million. That seems like a lot. I don't understand how we could be that far off, where that would come from.
Director Lee, are you looking at in the report here, or are you looking in the variance?
I'm looking at the year-to-date variance, page 1. On
The additional document?
the additional
Okay,
document.
thank you.
Yes. It's mentioned in the report.
Okay, so yeah, I just got that pulled up. So in general government, we are showing an overall surplus of $157,000. Is there a specific line item that you were looking
Yeah,
at?
it shows 151. It shows that surplus, but it's because we budgeted 500,000 and as a variance, and we have 1.194 as a variance.
Okay, so yes, all right, thank you. Referring to the, I guess it's Annex B, the attachment year-to-date by service. What we have here is government transfers. There is a timing difference there for the gas tax funds. They were advanced early again this year. Typically, we receive 2 installment payments, one in July, one in December. That second installment has been received already. So we recognize the revenue and then an associated transfer to appropriated surplus for those funds. So on the revenue line, there's a favorable variance of 1.18 million in government transfers, and that's offset by a variance of the transfer to appropriated surplus of 1.19 million. The other grant that's in there that is also impacting that, although to a lesser extent, is the Regional District Basic Grant, which is also received in July, and that just flows into general revenue. So that's the rationale there. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on any of these variances? All right, seeing no further questions, we will move on to next item. Thank you, Mr. Wing.
Thank you.
Funding community recreation facilities capital renewal through parcel taxes. This is Annex C, pages 13 through 17. And I think, Tina, we're over to you on this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in 2020, the financial sustainability was brought forward for review and recommended some changes to discreetly segregate operational and capital funding within a service. So as part of the 2020-2021 Community Recreation Capital Renewal Funding Review and subsequent amendments due to COVID to reduce that fund, it was recommended that an analysis of the legislative, procedural, and financial implications of transitioning the capital fund through property taxation versus parcel tax be conducted. Legislatively, to complete such a transition, bylaw 1058 and 577 would need to be amended to include capital expenditures as an allowable expenditure for the purpose of requisitioning parcel taxes under the Community Recreation Service. Copies of these bylaws were subsequently provided to the committee for your reference yesterday, so you should have those in your folders. Financially, it would result in a small increase to residential properties with improvements. The utilities and major industry would see the largest decrease, as these properties typically have highest improvement assessments compared to those other property classes. So based on the legislative and financial implications, it's not recommended that the community recreation facilities capital renewal funding be transferred to parcel tax from property taxation at this time, as it disproportionately shifts the taxation burden to lower valued properties. So we'll take any questions if the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, it was interesting digging into this because the wording of all these things is kind of confusing to the layperson. When we take out a loan, say for the community recreation facilities, I think of it, as sort of like a mortgage, that there's a term, but the bylaw doesn't say that. The bylaw doesn't say, this will expire in 20 years. It's a little vague. And our policy doesn't distinguish between different types of services that might have parcel tax applied to them. Like there are different kinds of capital. Maybe at some point we need to go back and think about that again. And I was wondering, these bylaws may have to be revised when we go to volumetric pricing for water. Would that be the case?
Yeah, so there was a few different bits there. So let me try to tackle the different components of kind of what was outlined there, if I may, Chair. So as far as the bylaws having end dates, it really is tied to the type of debenture or debt servicing that we actually take. So I think they're two discrete decisions. And so it's not completely explicit in the bylaw. And some of that stuff is you don't want to always constrain yourself in the bylaw because you want some latitude in some of your decision making. So I think but it's explicit in this particular bylaw in 577 in particular, what the bylaw was for. It was for the construction of those two facilities. So it's almost inferred that when that particular debt falls off, that we do, and that's typically or historically what's happened. So as far as some of the policy discussion pieces, I totally agree, and that's why every policy comes for renewal, because it evolves as different things change. So I fully agree on that. And yes, I think as part of this exercise internally, it definitely does make sense for certain types of services to be funded through property taxation for certain types of capital, whether it be minor capital or for major capital improvements. Then those types of things, I think more further discussion needs to happen where there is sort of a start and end date. Something like the water meters, which have a life cycle of 15 years, and we're going to borrow for that particular item. We're not going to create a separate parcel tax bylaw for that because we have legislative pieces within that. Subsequently, yes, bylaw 422 in general is being reviewed, and the rate structure for volumetric rates are being considered as part of the 2022-2023 work plan. So more to come on that. So I think those were all the bits.
Okay, I want to just paint a picture here for the board and for the community with regards to the two bylaws that we're using for recreation. So for parcel taxes right now, yes, it is being used to pay off the debt. But it does not incorporate gathering funds for future building. It's only to pay off the debt. So we are currently exploring the continued use or a timeline to continue using Sunshine Coast Arena and the Gibson's Pool. But we are not putting money away for any capital replacement at this time. So this report is coming forward and saying, right now, leave the gathering of the funds to parcel tax to pay off debt and property taxes or the improvement piece to cover off operating, etc. But this is a conversation we're going to have to revisit within the next couple of years as we pull all those other pieces together. If we change it now, as Ms. Pro has indicated, it would actually increase the parcel taxes. Correct? No, it would increase tell me again. It would increase one for the property owners.
Yeah, so if we made a transition to fund the capital renewal through parcel tax,
Yes.
where parcel tax is a flat tax, where property taxation is variable, and the variability in community recreation is that only the improvements are taxed. So bare land is a little bit different. What would happen on average, and this is where in the report there's a little more detail saying that if you're below the average, actually you would see a potential decrease. The parcel tax user would, because the parcel tax would increase for those lower valued properties, people would generally see a slight increase in the residential side of things. And where those properties where the flat tax was increased just as a flat tax versus the variability, those major industries and business classes. So the things with multiple multipliers, so business class, utilities, light industry, major industry, would see a significant decrease. So that burden would just transition to the residential class versus those other property classes.
Thank you. Director McMahon and then Director Beamish.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that parcel tax makes sense for a service like water, where my property is connected to the regional water system. And so the parcel tax goes to pay the capital cost of that connection. And, 99% of the people who have that connection are actually using it. So I think it makes perfect sense. With recreation, however, to put a parcel tax per property is a more problematic thing because a large number of the properties, probably the owners are not using that service. So, and of course, it's a less equitable way of taxing people because it's not per value of the property. So I think this is completely the right direction to go.
Thank you. Director Beamish.
Yes, thank you for the report. And I'm pleased to see the recommendation as it is. I just wondered, in terms of process, are you including the Director of Finance from Seashelt and Gibson's in the conversation? Because they're the ones going to have to kind of give advice to our council as a whole at some stage in time. So I just wonder if they're part of the conversation, if they understand what that conversation is.
So at this point, we're not recommending any change. So we're recommending sort of a status quo. However, the CFOs meet monthly. And we just missed our last monthly meeting just because due to holidays, but definitely I will flag this to them and tell them. And I recognize, and there's a comment in the report just to say that, you know, if we did transition and if there was a desire, then most certainly I would be speaking to him, because it would mean an additional workload, because the parcel tax role means just different timelines, and there's a lot of back and forth between staff on that front. So, you know, at this point, there's no change, which I think they'd be pretty pleased about. Just keep it status quo. But most certainly I will share it with them, because that's kind of what the purpose of our meetings are, is just to share mutual things that impact one another.
Thank you. Director Hilt?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was the report in terms of, I'm supportive of the recommendations, and that the analysis piece of how we distribute the financial cost. So where I'm looking at is on page 13. It was in, what I'm kind of wondering is, where are we in kind of all the amendments of the financial sustainability policy? Are we done with that? And then there's the where possible, this is where we are right now, is using our discretion here about where to apply the burden. So is there room for kind of a policy about where we apply parcel taxes, property value taxes based on land and or improvements, the guidance of how we decide one versus another? It's almost a case by case, and I'm wondering, for the public, for me, it's difficult to figure out which one to use. So is there room someplace, like even I see other local governments do it in the 5-year financial plan? They kind of explain how these different tools are used to shift the financial burden. So that's kind of the question. Where are we with the policy, and is there room for providing more guidance about where we use our discretion about how to shift the financial burden on taxpayers? Thanks.
Tina, did you want to address that?
Yeah, it's a good question and good points to make. And I think those are valuable discussion for boards to have. I think a lot of them are really philosophical when you're approaching a service by service basis, especially in a regional district model. And I think a few points have been made where utilities are the area where this type of segregation makes the most sense. I think as we evolve through service plans and asset management plans, we'll see a little more clarity on this type of thing, and especially when you establish a service. So that's why there's a lot of broad statements in establishment bylaws that give a broad range of options for funding. Because in the financial sustainability policy, and recognizing that you just have really only 2 bullets in here, but without the full financial sustainability policy, you'll see that, yeah, where possible, we want to recover through user fees. But again, we don't have any clear defined services for that, like goals. So there's no metrics to work towards. So I think in order to have definitive policy statements, you need to do some further analysis as to which service you'd like to approach that with. So for instance, with building inspection, we, through economic upturns and downturns, have had some variability in that service, where now we're 100% back to 100% funded through user fees. And so it's fully sustained. However, in the economic downturn through 2008 and several years, we had to tax for that particular service. So, you know, you have those variations, and the bylaws are written such where you can be able to adapt very quickly, because, you know, there's legislative steps. You want to be able to be nimble. So you don't want to put yourself in a corner, is I guess what I'm trying to say, but absolutely having the discussion and more understanding of what the philosophies are, especially as we evolve through our asset management plans. So do we fully cost recover for services, meaning do we save, or do we pass on burdens to the future taxpayer? I think it's a balance. Debt funding with reserve balancing. You don't want to burden the people today for 20, 30 years down the road. So it's a balance for sure.
Thank you. Director Toth?
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to staff for putting this report together. It's nice to see the options laid out for us. I do support the status quo on this. I'm happy to move the recommendation on page 13.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded? All right. No further questions or comments then? All right, I'd look for, okay, so we've got moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Moving on to item number 5, Standing Committee Terms of Reference, Annex D, pages 18 through 23. And this is our corporate officer.
Good morning. The purpose of this report is to bring forward amended terms of reference for the SCRD standing committees. The terms of reference have been updated in response to the reintroduction of a community services department earlier this year, followed by a request from the board chair to add a new standing committee for that department, and also in recognition that the SCRD standing committee structure aligns with our departmental structure. The terms of reference for all standing committees have been realigned as a result and are provided here for the committee's consideration. I'll also note that the new structure has been incorporated into the 2022 meeting schedule, which is the next report on this agenda.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why libraries are under corporate services still when they're funded through recreation and culture.
Tina?
Yes, Chair. So it's because the nature of the engagement with the library is generally a funding particular relationship. We provide an operational grant. So it's essentially a service agreement that is being discussed. It's not, we don't engage in the actual delivery of the library services. Some other local governments do, but we have a different arrangement with our libraries and reading rooms on the coast.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Director Ties?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to move the recommendations as presented on page 18.
And that's been seconded. Director McMahon, did you have a further question or comment? Thank you. Seeing no other questions or comments on the report, all those in favor? Thank you. Thank you. We'll move on to item 6, 2022 meeting schedule, Annex E, pages 24 through 37. And back over to our corporate officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the SCRD schedule of meetings is adopted annually, and as such, the 2022 meeting schedule has been brought forward for the committee's consideration. The significant change this year, as previously noted, is the addition of the Community Services Committee on the third Thursday afternoon of the month. And also to note is the absence of our Policing and Public Safety and Transportation Advisory Committees, as previously decided to potentially incorporate those issues into the Community Services Committee or other forms.
Thank you. Directors, any questions, comments? Director Ties?
Yeah, happy to move those recommendations as well on page 24.
Thank you, and that's seconded. Seeing no further questions or comments, all those in favor? Thank you very much. Moving on, number 7, status of operating and capital reserves as of September 30th, 2021, Annex F, pages 38 through 43. And this is this, who is speaking to this one? Is it Tina, are you?
Yeah, I can speak to this one, Chair. Very briefly, the purpose of this report is just to provide a semi-annual update to the committee on the status of the capital reserves, operating capital reserves for the regional district, including things like our parkland acquisition funds, our landfill closure, post-closure liability funding, and our development cost charges as well as gas tax, which was previously or subsequently reported individually. So this also, with our pre-budget coming on November 1st and 2nd, may just be sort of a resource document for that particular meeting, but this will also be provided supplemental to the round one budget discussions as well for reference. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Director Ties?
Yeah, thank you. In agenda review, we had a quick discussion around the landfill closure reserve and that the contributions or the topping up is ending. I think, is it this year or next year? And I'm wondering when we are going to have that discussion. Is that at pre-budget that we would be having this discussion, or is that or would that be today or some other time?
So on the pre-budget agenda, you will find a proposed initiative to address that through the budget discussions. So it has been suggested that we continue on with the top up of $125,000 per year. A discrete analysis, I think, and discussing what would be appropriate and the status of things, I think we could table that discussion when our general manager of infrastructure is back from vacation, so he should be here for Mondays. So I would suggest we get into that discussion perhaps next week.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Right. I have a feeling that I've asked this before, but why do we have feasibility funds, feasibility reserve funds for two areas? And I also wanted to ask about the smoke control reserves and what's the plan for that? I think that money was put aside in the anticipation that there would be a big cost in terms of bylaw for administering the smoke control bylaw, and that really hasn't been the case. So are we just drawing it down at a fixed amount, or what's the plan on those?
So on the feasibility for areas B and D, there is actually a comment about what to do with those particular funds in the pre-budget report. And it is recommending that we return those funds back to the taxpayers. Those funds were requisitioned back in 2014 for the exploration of curbside recycling for those particular areas. So we didn't know whether or not they'd have to be discrete services. So that was part of it. That's part of feasibility, is deciding how you're going to roll it out. So more information on Monday, just about what to do with the status of those funds. And yeah, the suggestion is to return it to the taxpayer. As far as smoke control, that is historical in the sense where we have generated some surpluses. And as mentioned by the manager of financial services this morning, surpluses are rolled into the operating reserves as part of the financial sustainability. But what has happened with smoke control in the past is we have offset the taxation because part of our financial sustainability is like where there's not really a general purpose for the reserves, we can look to offset some taxation. So that is what we've been doing with the smoke control. So we've actually not requisitioned for smoke control for I think a number of years. So hopefully smoke control will slowly deplete over the years. And yes, there is sort of a small nuance in the sense where we still have to allocate in a contingency that there is some issues that someone has to address there. So,
Sorry, could you clarify smoke control? What is that for? What do we use that for?
The particular bylaws, I think, are administered through the fire departments, and they are bylaws related to burning bylaws and whatnot. I will defer to the corporate officer to clarify.
Thank you. Actually, they do come under bylaw enforcement, and we do try to differentiate, though difficult to do at times, between what is a smoke complaint versus illegal burning.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks. The question I had is where, in terms of the reserve funds, where do things like the IPP community benefits funds, and there are these other community benefit or community amenity funds, and where they live and where they're recorded so we know how much is there? Thanks. And particularly interested in the Box Canyon IPP as a Area F interest. Thank you.
So following the breadcrumbs for the IPP funds, they flow through various services based on how an amenity agreement is outlined. So in the particular case of Box Canyon, there is currently $10,000 that is allocated as general purpose for, community benefit for the organization. So those are currently flowing through the regional district's general government service. And then they're distributed through to the reserve fund for general government. So there are specific clauses for, say, Granthams for that particular one. So that was used for that project and used for those funds. We also have some other type of amenity funding that flows through parks. So, for instance, we have some funds that were used towards the Coopers Green redevelopment project. So, yeah, it really depends on what the agreement states. We really don't have a lot of amenity agreements, but typically general government and parks are the two that are reflected. Now, so they're kind of built into some of the reserves here.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this report? Director Hiltz, did you have something follow-up?
Sure. The follow-up is the breadcrumbs are scattered, it sounds like, and to bring them all into one basket, I'm just, how do we keep track of them from a public point of view? Like, is there an accounting, I don't think we see it anywhere that this balance exists, because I guess the public I might think that there's this pot sitting there unused, which is the case in agriculture. So it depends on the agreement. And so there isn't necessarily just one account where the funds live. They're distributed. So if I said how much is in the Box Canyon Reserve, would there be a number?
So reserves are generally statutory in nature. There's usually a bylaw, like an operating or capital bylaw that outlines what you can use them for. Now, what we can do for the next report is definitely look at if there is some discrete funding built into some of these funds, look to try to maybe add like a supplemental schedule to those and provide some additional information on where some IPP funds may sit, because we do have some very specific agreements with entities related to the amenities contribution that they're providing. So what I'm hearing is, and maybe a motion brewing, to provide some more detailed information related to amenities contribution as part of this particular report.
And would that
be what I'm hearing?
Yeah, would that be specific to the IPPs?
Well, I think it would be amenity funds, because we do have some amenities contribution that are not actually specific to the IPPs.
Okay, Director Hiltz, did you want to take
I'm
a stab at that?
happy to make a motion, which the summary is an update on the status of the community benefits and amenities, I think is kind of what we're looking at. Is that a short form?
Does that work, Tina?
Yeah, and we can, what I would suggest is we just include it as part of this report. So we just amend this reporting on a biannual basis, and it's a discrete, separate schedule as part of the report.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. So that's the motion, and it's been seconded. Any further questions or comments on that? Director Hiltz, did you have further comments? All right. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions or comments on that, we'll move on to item number 8, Annex G, pages 44 through 47. And this is Gas Tax Community Works Fund Update. And Tina, are you taking this again?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this particular report too, like the reserves, is provided a couple of times a year. We've provided again earlier, noting that there are some top-ups for last year and this year related to COVID from the federal government. So definitely on this particular list, there's quite a built-out amount. There's unspent funds of approximately 7.1 million. I also note that as part of the budget, preliminary budget discussions, there's definitely a review from staff as to some opportunities to use these funds as part of 2022 budget proposals. I do also believe that as part of TAC last week as well, there were some discussions about some next steps related to active transportation. So I definitely lots flowing as far as planning for these particular projects going forward. If I could also note that as part of this year's review, UBCM and the federal government has made some slight name changes with this particular fund now. And so we've articulated that in the report as well, as it's less about gas tax and more about Canada Community Building Fund. So it has a little bit rebranding different. The program has also allowed for some new categories or eligible funding, and some of those are related to fire services for the first time. I will note that purchasing discrete fire equipment like fire trucks is not eligible. However, if expanding a service, they may be eligible. So those can be reviewed as well. So just wanted to make note of some of the positive changes as part of the fund.
Thank you. Director Ties and then Director McMahon.
Yeah, thank you. And this report kind of ties in with the item of new business I had proposed, and I guess with discretion of the chair, we could discuss that now, or do you want to do that later with new business?
Do we have yes, we do. We have Director Gagnon with us.
GM, yeah.
GM, sorry. GM, we're directors. Yeah, it's it's different depending which table you're sitting at. Okay. Director Ties, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess ultimately this is a timing question, and I tabled this, or I sent an email out with this new proposed motion, potentially that staff bring forward a budget proposal for round one budget to hire a consultancy firm in order to begin planning the expansion of our active transportation infrastructure in the rural areas. And this is keeping in mind that our gas tax community works funds kind of need to be allocated, or at least we need to have a plan for them, I think, by 2024. And I know the community is waiting for, eagerly waiting for things like shoulder widening on Lower Road and other active transportation infrastructure things. And so I guess my question is around timing. GM Gagnon mentioned yesterday in an email that there are some steps planned for next year, and something about Q3 2022 that we might want to create a larger plan with all the stakeholders, which I'm very much in favor of. But it seems to be tied to some grant funding. And if we don't put it in the budget this year, and we don't end up getting grant funding, this won't happen till 2023, when we might put it in the budget then. So ultimately, I'm just asking whether we want to ensure that this is going to get dealt with in 2022, or whether we're willing to wait all the way until the budget for 2023 is active if we don't get grant funding.
Thank you. GM Gagnon.
Thank you, Chair. So maybe I'll just take the opportunity to provide some more information about what Community Services is planning in next year. So we have identified the area of active transportation, and I would actually expand that to I'm not sure what the term is, but I consider it to be non-vehicular travel. So whether that's by a pathway, a bikeway, a trail, it's how we move around the coast outside of vehicles. And there's a plan to look at trying to pull together all the information that exists between different levels of government, whether that's District of Sechelt, Town of Gibsons, SCRD, MODI, the school district, some of our community organizations that are very active in planning, and try to map out the coast and identify where our gaps are, and then put together a plan for recommendations around priorities and how we might implement. And then we each will have a piece in that. So in terms of then, going forward and coming up with the implementation plan and the budgets accordingly. And so for me, there's a lot of pre-work that needs to happen, and that is getting all of those partners at the table to have the discussion and commit to the process. And so we've identified that as a division, as a priority to begin those conversations and those explorations based on other priorities that we have on the docket for next year, to start those conversations in Q3 of next year of 2022, which would then position us to have that scope of work identified that we could then apply for grants to actually begin the project late 2022, early 2023, to be in a position to know where we want to spend the money for that based on the implementation plan. So there's a couple things. Active transportation, of course, is not the only area that you can spend your gas tax funding in. There's also other opportunities for that. And certainly you may not want to be held to, the commitment of whether we get a grant or not. I certainly understand that and would respect that if you guys want to make sure that there's funding in place to move this forward. It's a pretty large project that's going to take quite a few months, I think, to build it out. But I think it's certainly well worth our time. So to your point, Director Ties, it's really a matter of, we weren't going to start the work anyways based on the other priorities until Q3 of 2022, which would still give us time to bring forward any budget required outside of a grant if we weren't successful for the 2023 to launch the project.
Did you want to follow up, Director Ties?
Yeah, I guess ultimately my question is, it sounds like whether we get grant funding for this or not, the timelines are still such that the earliest, well, I guess my question is, do we need funding for anything happening in 2022? So whether it's grant funding or through a budget request.
Thank you for asking for the clarity. I appreciate it. It would be my suggestion that we don't need funding for anything in 2022, because it's the pre-work that needs to happen to put the scope of the project together, that we would require a consultant to help us move the plan forward. I also would like to take the opportunity to just I think you've heard my mantra before, and that is a consideration that needs to be part of this planning is not just the cost of construction, because I think you've heard me say it before, construction is often the easy piece. It's the ongoing operating of the infrastructure that is built after the fact that is often can be quite costly in nature, and that sometimes is not remembered. And I think that we can see that reflected in some of the work that we've done in previous years, especially around active transportation. We built some infrastructure that there weren't clear understandings or agreements around how that infrastructure would be managed. And so we are now going to be faced with costs around failing infrastructure and aging infrastructure that perhaps weren't initially anticipated, that in my mind need to be part of this project, that is also anticipated and clearly outlined in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a comment about District of Sechelt and how that would fit in this. Our engineering department and planning department are actually looking at a transportation master plan. We have one, but it's old, it's outdated, and we're in the same place. We don't know, do we need to build this little piece of a trail to connect, what's in place? We don't know what to ask our developers to provide to us. So we're working on that as well, and that would then feed into this bigger plan for the Sunshine Coast. Director McMahon.
Thanks. I totally understand the need to plan the network, but I do share some of Director Tice's anxiety, I think, because having read the MOU with Modi, this is a many step process to get even a trail approved. And I just worry that we're going to be really pushed in the end to try and get some of these projects completed. However, be that as it may, I will also forward you the Rogue Active Transportation Plan for Area E, which I did last year with some consultation with my residents. I also wanted, I spent a little bit of time reading through the gas tax, like what we can spend it on. And it is fairly broad. And in Area E, most of the easy opportunities for road widening have been finished already. But we have a lot of parks and walking trails that, in addition to their recreational benefit, could play a role in climate change mitigation, such as carbon sequestration and stormwater management. I have enormous stormwater problems in my area, and I'm thinking of, for instance, there is a connector path along the Cureton road right away that has a stream running alongside it, which is actually, it's a ditch, but it is a diverted tributary of Chester Creek. And it's starting to have very serious flooding problems. So, is there an opportunity there to enhance the walking and cycling experience along that trail and also do some stormwater management? So, and that might also open up some more grant opportunities for topping up our gas tax money. So I'm hoping we can get creative for some local solutions.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks. So this topic about the next steps in the report, in the Q3 2022 report, I'm looking on page 45, and it was community service staff is anticipating bringing a report. So is that when the results of the preliminary work will be done? Is Q3 or something before? I'm just trying to establish what the future looks like. Which future are we looking at here? Q3 2022 or something sooner? Thanks.
Thank you, Director Hiltz, for the question. So I'm going to go off memory from my Q3 report, but I believe that what I was referring to was that the work would begin and the big work that begins is scoping out the project that we will need a consultant to help us complete with our partners. And at that point in time, once we have the scope of the project, a report will come forward, whether it's through the budget for the 2023 budget, or if we have it at a time where it's going to need to come forward outside of that. That's the report that I'm speaking of, once I have it scoped. But we have other priorities for the first 2 quarters of 2022. So the thinking and the scoping and the conversations will begin in Q3 of 2022 is what I'm proposing. Does that answer your question? Good, thank you.
Thank you. Any other further questions or comments on this report? All right. Thank you, GM Gagnon. We'll move on to item number 9, Corporate Space Plan Update, Annex H, pages 48 through 51. And Ms. Burrow, is this?
Yeah, I can start off, Chair. So this particular report was provided as a question during the Budget Project Status Report in September. And due to the Corporate and Administrative Services not bringing quarterly reports, our next report was not until January. So we felt it was prudent to provide some update to the committee ahead of that time. So 2 projects were approved, one in 2020 and one in 2021, for space planning upgrades to both Field Road and Mason Road. So for the 2020, some of those projects at Mason Road have been completed, and those were some renovations in the water utility facility. So we also have a top up for 2021, and as a result, we've had a real paradigm shift from what we were proposing in 2020 and even out of the 2019 space planning project that came out of Cornerstone's report. So we've had several new resources also approved. And as such, our space planning project has really transitioned almost into what we are coining the alternative work strategy. And it is a change in how we work, meaning we do more hybrid work. We have people working from home part-time, and we have flexible workspaces. So it's really changed the dynamic on how we use our space here at Field Road, especially, and throughout the organization, really. So as part of the scope of this project, it includes mostly the staffing spaces. So our meeting rooms and our staff workstations and offices throughout Field Road. And there has been significant progress related to that. So we have multiple shared offices. We're going to be creating some touchdowns. So we're still work in progress, but there's also a significant change in our IT technology that is required to accommodate all the various pieces required for an alternative work strategy. So what that would mean is that my workstation right now does not have a camera or the sufficient system needs to support remote work. So we have to kind of band-aid stuff together. So that is one of the biggest components of the part of this project to support staff in this hybrid working environment. So also the boardroom was not included as part of this particular project. So there is a proposal coming forward as part of the 2021 proposed initiatives next week to talk about what that would look like. And the reason why it wasn't included is because at that particular time, we had audiovisual equipment to stream meetings being a work in progress as these particular approvals were done. So that also enabled us to pivot to remote work when the pandemic hit us. So yeah, we provided a little detail as far as where we are. There's been significant communications with our various teams, various different type of initiatives, individual meetings, and meeting with individual staff. So this is ongoing still in our organization. And so we recognize it's a huge change management, but it's been really positive in the organization. So we'll take any questions if there are any. And I want to note that we have Valerie Kropp here and David Nelson to answer any questions, as Valerie has been conducting most of the project from the implementation side, the moves, the space moves, the furniture purchases, etc., and the change management with staff, and David, the IT side. So
Thank you. Director Tighe.
Thank you. And yeah, reading the report, I was reading at the top of page 51 something about thin clients, and I being a Luddite of IT, I assumed it was either a spelling mistake or something very weird in the report. So if you could go into a little bit into depth what thin clients are, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we're referring to our existing little black boxes that we see on all the desks as our zero clients. And they're basically units that weren't designed to support audiovisual, mostly just a screen to interact with. And they've served us well, but they're getting a bit long in the tooth. And so from capital asset management strategy, they were getting due to be replaced anyway. And then along comes the pandemic, and we have an immediate need to support audiovisual and hybrid meetings and video links from people working anywhere. So we are now upgrading to what we're calling thin clients, which are devices that have some video offloading and processing capabilities in them to facilitate online meetings better.
Thank you. Did that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Beamish and then Director Hiltz.
Yes, thank you for this report. Very interesting. I intend to share this with our own staff because the whole issue of working remotely and having to have office space is one that we are confronted with as well in terms of limited space and the inability to expand. So I appreciate that, and thank you. It's a lot of good ideas in here. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Thanks, Chair. The question I have is one of the topics that's out there in the world right now is the equity of job opportunities for people in person versus the remote workers, and that it might not all be equal going forward. So is this somehow built into the system that the SERD is looking at how the physical space facilitates equity of opportunity for the remote workers and the in-person? It just the physical and the hard and the soft got to come together. And so is it equity in terms of remote and in-person workers? Is that built into this system somehow? Thanks.
Hi, thank you for the question. Yeah, there's a lot of considerations that put into place that allow the flexibility. I mean, there is certain employees that are considered residents and they don't really get the option to work from home, like the receptionist would be a prime example. It doesn't really work for the position to be at home. But other than that, it's based on the type of work that you do, around the flexibility that you have, having the ability to come into the offices, book the touchdown areas and stations that we've created that can either be people that are what we call like internally mobile. So they don't necessarily, whoops, sorry, my camera's falling down. That we don't actually really have those opportunities. Again, sorry about the camera there. So we allow staff to have that flexibility based on their job type, their functions, and if they're able to. So there is employees that aren't able to work at home, so they have the option to be permanently at the office because maybe they live in an area that doesn't have proper internet access. So we try to make it as equitable as possible for all employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon, and then I'll put myself on the list.
Yeah, I'm just waxing philosophical here about how much it's changed in just 5 years in terms of the technology we have available to us and the way that everybody's working. Like just the ability now to control the siphon or monitor the siphon up at Chapman Lake by phone remotely instead of flying people in every day. So we're in the middle of massive shift. Most of it much for the better. I'm looking forward to kind of portable remote meeting solutions. We had a great meeting with Islands Trust. If we think we have challenges about meetings, holy cow, they're really challenged. But they're trying to put together a portable kit that you can take and hold a meeting and have a hybrid meeting, and it's not easy. Our IT staff sometimes makes it look easy. It's not easy. Thanks.
Director Tighe just made a comment. It's not for public. So you talk about touchdown stations. I've been hearing them previously called hot desks. I think that's the same thing, is it not? Hot desk is a touchdown station, so it's open to whoever comes in to use it. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, hot desk station, touchdown station, mobile station. There's kind of a bunch of names that basically means the same. Once we get a little bit sort of further down the path, we will have same bookable ones as well as just first come, first serve ones.
Yeah, that was one of my next question. Are we to that point yet? You know, where if a staff member wants to come in, they can actually book which station they're going to be using. Because if we're managing how many staff are in the building or ensuring we have space for them, we need to have that capability that they can come in. Now, that also means that on the IT side is anybody can log into any machine, right? They have their own credentials, they log in, and it doesn't matter if they're, down one hall or another hall, wherever there's an open desk, they have the ability to use that.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Did you want to respond to that? That's fine. Go ahead.
I was just going to say yes. We have two different types of touchdown stations here, where we have a one room that's designated with a bunch, and those will be free. And then we have the ones that will be bookable, and those are a little bit more like the actual desks that are in the different areas. So if people want to touch down and work with a specific group, they can do that, and those will be bookable. And then we have breakout rooms that we'll be rolling out as well that will be bookable. And the idea is that everybody can log in with their phone and with their computer. Thank you.
Okay. One of the things that we're finding in the district of Sechelt is there's a shortage of meeting space. So it's, we have offices that could potentially be turned into small meeting rooms. Because we don't have staff in with their designated spaces, when we actually want to have meetings, we need to provide a space for them to do that. Is that something that's showing up here as well?
Thank you. Yes, those will be the breakout rooms that we have. So they're basically small, little intimate meeting spaces. So they can be booked as a small meeting room, or they can be booked if you need to have private, confidential conversations, those types of avenues, or you're going to be in a big Zoom meeting all day in a conference or something online.
All right. Director Beamish and then Director Lee.
Yeah, just a question in regarding to the staff working at home. What supports are we providing to staff to be able to work at home, to either reconfigure their space, to provide a home office, to provide technical capabilities at home, and other matters that may come up when you're converting your home into an office?
I can start with that one. And so essentially there has been a policy decision at the start of COVID really is that if people were going to be working from home, just I think from the large and the scope of size of regional district, because we have, several hundred staff people, it was sort of a choice. So we did have a lot of people who couldn't work from home that actually did work from the regional district. So we don't provide any financial support to the staff. As far as working from home, they are expected to have the appropriate equipment. And that was part of our questionnaire at the start of this, was that, are you able to? Because we're not forcing people to work from home. There's a lot of people who've expressed. So we did surveys with our staff to see what they wanted to do. And about 2/3 of staff or more, I think actually it was 80% of staff actually said that they wanted sort of a 3-day a week and 2 days from home at maximum. So most people wanted to return to work the majority of the time. So that's how this particular rollout has been laid out. So we are also finding that we have a lot of space at the regional districts. It's just how we use our space here at Field Road. So so far it's been good. Where people do not have the equipment, there are different programs that we have at the regional district where people can purchase equipment at sort of a very discounted rate, etc. So people are accounted for those. We also CRA too as part of COVID, and I don't know, that's one of the unknowns is how they're going to accommodate this shift in the workplace, because for COVID, they did allow certain types of deductions for people. So one of the things we're keeping in mind just from an HR and finance perspective are things where people are having to be provided a form called a T2200 form, not to get into too much detail, but whether or not you're able to allowable expenditures for people to write off for home office. So it is pretty minimal. I mean, most people, all they need is a computer. Printing can still be done here at Field Road, and that's why most people come into the office, is to use the technology here at the office.
Thank you. Director Beamish, follow-up?
As a follow-up, I guess I'd be concerned if we are showing through this process some savings, that those savings be used in some way to support staff as well in those areas, so that, and obviously in the startup of any kind of program, there's no savings, but in the long term, using savings by having home offices, I think we need to find a way to share that with staff. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Yes, I was just wondering, it's more of a technical question. I'm assuming there is a secure access to corporate records already, so they can get at the corporate records. Did we have to do IT changes, or we had enough capacity and we had that already in place? And a second question is, do we have I call it a phone transfer to home phone. In other words, if someone's phoning an SCRD number and the person that normally answers it is at home, can they transfer it so real-time pickup and then transfer it back so it goes just to a message? Do we have sufficient phone support for remote work?
Yes, thank you for the question, Director Lee. We have changed our phone system so that staff working from home are able to dial out through the SCRD switchboard to obscure their personal phone number if they so choose. And what was the first part of your question?
In effect, can they forward the office phone to their home line from their home?
Yes, they can do that. And we've also established some agent queuing that's available for like rec services where a call center type scenario is available so that a number of staff can sign on to be taking calls from that queue.
Thank you. That's pretty advanced stuff. It's good.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this report? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. And I think, Ms. Kropp, you're going to be staying with us for the next items. Moving on to item number 10, Director Constituency and Travel Expenses. Annex I, pages 52 and 53. Any questions or comments on this one? All right, seeing none, let's move on to Annex J. This is contracts between $50,000 and $100,000 from July 1st to September 30th, 2021. And Ms. Kropp, did you want to lead into this or just take any questions?
Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Directors, any questions on this report? I'm not seeing any hands up. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to number 12, Annex K, pages 56 through 58. And this is with regards to the Church Road Wellfield project update. And do we have Mr. Mazurek with us? Okay, would it be Mr. Walkie? Okay, let's bring him into the meeting. All right. Here he comes. So this is the Church Road Wellfield project. Mr. Walkie, I believe you're here to speak to this.
Thank you. We're also waiting for manager Mazurek. I believe he will be joining in a moment.
Okay, there he is. Let me promote him. Thank you. So we're on item number 12, Annex K, pages 56 through 58. Mr. Mazurek, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Chair Seegers. The purpose of this report is to request a contract amendment with Associated Environmental Consultants in the amount up to $50,000 for their support in assisting the SCRD in both the tendering and contract award phase for the Church Road Well project. The water license is projected to be issued within the coming weeks, as previously reported by Infrastructure General Manager Remco Rosenboom. As you are aware, this is a complicated project from both an environmental permitting and technical perspective, requiring the assistance from the engineers and hydrogeologists at Associated to adequately and fully respond to questions that will occur during tendering. Give you an example of the complication, how complicated the project is. It's over 900 pages, the contract documents that'll be going out to tender. So it's quite extensive. The final tender documents are being prepared for early tendering at this time, and tendering could occur as early as next week. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Good news. Director Pratt.
No questions, just incredible gratitude and appreciation for all of the staff work that has gone into this. It has been a very long and complicated process, so I am just absolutely thrilled to be seeing this move forward. And if there's no other questions, then I'd like to move the recommendations, please.
Thank you, and that has been seconded. Are there any other questions? All right, seeing no further questions, all those in favor of the recommendations? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, over to new business. Director Ties, Active Transportation Infrastructure Planning. Did you want to also do anything? Okay, we're good? Perfect. Any other new business from staff? I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And we have no attendees in the gallery. So IT, are there any questions that have come through via email?
Nothing from this side. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you all this afternoon.